All right, this short video, we're just going to go through sort of a extension of the last presentation where we took a GeoTIFF file which had a near-infrared band and a visible or red band and created our NDVI layer. And we're going to extend that with using some of the tools that we're already used to using and calculate our yield values for our pivot area sectors for our irrigation prescription. So I want to kind of review a couple things here as we go forward. First off, it's always a good idea to check out the Dropbox and see if there's any new patches or tools that have been updated. And as of today, there is a new patch, 2016. Today's the 6th, at around 11:30ish. That's when that patch was uploaded. So make sure you get that, download that, and go through the processes that you've done in the past to update those tools. Next, make sure you go through the steps of creating a project. So I went ahead and created a Agra Northwest folder under my farms folder. I created a new file geodatabase. I right-clicked, made sure that was my default geodatabase for my project, saved my project out. So my current map document says map.mxd. And then I set my coordinate system to the right coordinate system. So if I go under right-click under my data frame properties, we should see my coordinate system is my state plane, Washington South, because that's where this particular data set falls in. So you want to make sure those things are in place and ready to go, and those and previous tutorials will get you to that to this state. So what we're looking at here is our NDVI raster layer for this particular pivot and farm. And the only thing different from the previous workflow for creating this raster is instead of creating a TIFF file, I just create a grid inside of my geodatabase. So I actually stored that raster data set inside of my file geodatabase so that that data will be alongside everything else that I create and manage inside that one structure there, which is good for organizing and sharing and things like that. So the next thing I need to do is I need to turn this raster into a point feature class. And so you can come here, search for a raster to point, and there's the command. I can just execute it from here, or I can go down, and as you get more used to these tools, you'll go down into the toolbox, system tools, go to conversion, from raster to point. There's raster to point. Double click that, and you'll see other tools that are available to you. So basically, it's pretty straightforward. I grab my raster. This is my NDVI raster data set. Use the value that I want to associate each point with, and then give it a name. And so what I want to do is I want to copy this naming structure and paste it here. And this is going to be my my NDVI point feature class, right? Now, I'm not a big fan of all these numbers. I think it just confuses things. Maybe put here pivot _1 or something to that nature, and kind of get it working that way, so it's it's a little more manageable, easier to work with. So NDVI pivot _1, hit OK, and it's going to go out and create that feature class, point feature class, within inside of that file geodatabase for that project. And so I'm going to pause for a second while this executes. Okay, that's completed, and now I got a new point feature class, and we can see that underneath my catalog structure, folders, farms, refresh. And now I see my NDVI point. Now, this data set is quite large. Now, if I right-click and say open up attribute table and have it load, there's going to be a lot of data points. I think it's close to 1.9 million points that are going to make up this this area, and it takes a little bit to render and display and to work with, depending on your computer, your memory, your CPU, your graphics card, things like that. So we need to filter this out some. We only need to work with the data that we want to work with and not have all this noise around here. So we're going to do two selections, a select by area and a select by attribute, to further filter out this data to reduce this number. You can see our number is at 1.88, so almost 1.9 million records. We need to get that down to something more manageable. And we don't really need anything else, right? We just need the stuff that's represented within that pivot. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move up that NDVI raster so I can get a sense of what I'm doing here. My point data set is just below that. You can't see the points, but they're still there. And the first thing I want to do is I want to select all the points that fall within my pivot area. And then from that, reselect out of those points those that with a value that I want to work with. All right, I don't want to work with everything in here. I want to work with just those values that mean something to me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my selection tool. So I'm going to drop this box down here. I'm going to say select by circle. And I'm going to start from the center here. And I'm going to use my left mouse button, hold it down. And while I'm holding it down, drag that out to the edge. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just have to be within that pivot area, because we're going to further select out the data points that we want. I'm going to let go of the mouse. Now, again, this is going to take a few seconds here because there's lots of data points that I have to spatially query to get the representation back. So I'll pause and we'll start up again here in a second. Okay, you can see it's returned back my selection set, and it's highlighting all those points that fall within that radius, that circle radius that I drew on the map there. And you can see when it finishes up here, you'll see that we reduced those points from 1.8 down to, or 1.9, almost to 1.22, 1.3, 1.23. So we're getting better, but it's still not good enough. So the next thing I want to do is I want to select by attributes. So I'm going to use the selection drop-down box here, go to select by attributes. And I'm going to select from the NDVI .1 point feature class. You can see it's a point feature class because of this icon. And what's most important here is under the method selection, I want to make sure that I have select from current selection. All right, that's the key here. Otherwise, you have to start over again. And then I want to build my query. So I want to have grid values greater than, or grid code values greater than 0.2. Now this number could be anything you want. This is what means most to you for the NDVI values for this pivot area, but I'm going to start with the 0.2. And I'm going to hit OK. So now it goes out and selects from the current selection all those points that have a value of 0.2 or higher. Which now we're down to 160,000, much more manageable data set that I can use then to further my analysis. And so at this point, if I'm happy with this, I want to export out this data. If I'm not happy with this, redo this. Clear the selection set, redo those two last steps, and get the data points you want. But I'm happy with this, so I'm going to now right-click on my point feature class, this NDVI Pivot 1, and I'm going to export out the data from the data export out data option here. And this is similar to what we've done in the past. I'm going to select, export all selected features. I'm going to use the coordinate system of the data frame, not the source, the data frame, and then put it in the right place. Okay, so we know that this is the existing point feature class is called NDVI underscore pivot underscore 1. Well, now this is really going to be my yield. So I'm going to go NDVI underscore yield underscore pivot underscore 1. Okay, so this is now my yield data derived from my NDVI for pivot 1, or whatever pivot number it may be. And hit OK. And now it's going to take and create a new point feature class with only 160,000 features. And it's going to ask me here, do I want to add that to my map when it's completed? So there's the message. We'll hit yes. And at this point, I don't need this other layer anymore in my table, in my map. So I'm going to right click and say remove, and now my data and map will respond much better. But everything's still in my geodatabase. So now I have my original, 1.9 million point feature class here. And if I don't need that, I'm just going to work with this going forward, then get rid of this. This is just taking up extra space and stuff. And that's a lot of records. So I'm going to right click and say delete and clean up my file geodatabase. So now I only have two data sets in there, my converted NDVI raster and my NDVI yield point feature class for pivot 1. Okay. Now the next step here is to create my sectors and then do my calculations. So we've done that in the past here. Let's just redo that process. So what I'm going to do So what I'm going to do is I want to just go ahead and jump right to my tool that allows me to create those sectors, and I'll review some of these steps too. But you should be familiar with this. I'm just going to jump down to my sector management toolbox and grab my build irrigation sectors. I'm going to double click that. I'm going to find the route. So I got to find the route here. I'm working with Agra Northwest. That's my route in this case from my file geodatabase. I'm going to give it a name. So this is going to be my irrigation sectors underscore pivot underscore 1. Grab my coordinate system, which is Washington South. This is one of my favorites. I'm starting to gather some favorites up here, and then put in my centroid for that pivot. Now, if you recall, there were several ways of finding out that information, and I just used one of those methods and found my center point and also my radius. And in this case, I'm going to do 2 sectors instead of 6. And there we go. So establish your centroid, establish your radius, your sector size, coordinate system, where you're going to put this thing at, and then let it go execute. So if you forget how to find the centroid and or the radius, review past the tutorials, and that'll get you to that spot. So now we've got our sectors here, and I'm going to turn off the raster data set. Don't need that anymore. I got my 2-degree sectors. I'm going to zoom in a little bit tighter here. I've got my my NDVI yield, and now I'm ready to rock and roll here. So the very next thing I'm going to do, remember, every time you create a vector, an irrigation sector polygon, let's look at the attributes, there's some things that need to happen. We need to calculate a unique ID right now. And I just updated some code to do a couple things. It's going to calculate the unique ID as well as populate my start and end degree sections here. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go down to my tools and say calculate unique ID, which is now going to also populate my start and ending sectors. And so we'll grab my irrigation sector pivot 1, hit OK, and it's going to go out and process that information for me. And now it might do a lot of re-rendering. In some cases, you might want to turn all the rendering off, so it doesn't have to render this every time it does a selection. So it's going to do this for every sector out there. So just got to pause for a second here. Okay, so that completed. It took about 9 minutes. Now, note to self. So turn off layers that have to be rendered every time it's being calculated. So I should have turned off at least my NDVI point layer before I executed that. So anyways, so that's done. So now if I right click and bring up the attributes for that, we should see I've got my unique IDs and I've got my start and end degrees calculated for each one. So now I need to go to the next step here, which is just calculate my yield, mean, and median values. And we do that the same way that we've done before. We'll just go down to my sector processing and say calculate yield values. And I'll bring in my irrigation sector layer, and then I'll bring in my yield readings, which is in my NDVI yield pivot 1. I'll grab the value. In this case, it's the grid code, and then I'll let this execute for a while. And this one has a message there to kind of show you what's happening as well. Again, turn off layers, or if you want to just kind of see things work as they go, you'll be able to see them here. So let's pause until this is done. So this process will take some time depending on how many points that are being aggregated against each 2-degree sector in this case. And so that's where it's important to get down the number of yield data points and or NDVI data points that are being used to the calculation to a reasonable size, a size adequate enough to give you the data set that's needed to adequately calculate some good values, but you don't want to get too large because it'll just take more time. And I guess it all depends on what you want to process. Okay, so this is completed. Let's hit OK and just validate that everything worked out all right. Hit open up attribute table, and now we see our yield mean and yield median values for our unique sectors there. So that concludes this tutorial.